no, that picture's still on there. I thought I got rid of you. There it goes. There we go. That's not what I was expecting. All right. We're good now. Technical issue. Welcome in, guys. Welcome to Wrestling with My Thoughts episode. I think it's 17. Can't remember. Today we have a special guest, as you can see here to my right, or whatever direction this is. The camera gets me fucking backwards. TikTok's Smithception. Smith, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right, man. It's a pleasure being on here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. I think you and I are very similar in a lot of ways in how we interact with our crowds on TikTok. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of respect for that, in that we do not give a single fuck when people disagree with us, as long as they are respectful about it. And if they are not respectful about it, both of us are very much more than willing to call them on it. And I think we have that in common. So it was always a goal of mine to have you on.
Awesome.
So obviously we got a lot to talk about today. Boom. We're not going to start with that, but we're going to get there. I don't want to get distracted. So Smith, I want to start off and just talk about you a little bit, man. So you talk about a lot of different stuff on your TikTok, but I think where your follower base was built, where you spend a lot of your time, is wrestling. So where did that, if you want to call it, I call it a passion of mine. If you want to call it a love, a passion, an interest, or a hobby, whatever you want to call it, when did that start for you, as early as you can remember?
So the earliest memory that I have of me caring about wrestling dates back to, I want to say, I think I was in middle school, and my cousin was really into wrestling, but I hadn't known anything about it yet. And before I had even watched anything, I remember playing SmackDown vs. Raw 2009 with him, like, religiously, and just like getting to know all these people and like their hypothetical movesets. And then eventually I actually started watching the show. I think the first show I ever caught and like sat and watched the whole way through was an episode of SmackDown in December of 2009, where the opening segment involved a back and forth between The Undertaker and Chris Jericho, where Undertaker grabbed Chris by the throat, looked like he was going to choke slam him, but just like throws him out of the ring. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And then next thing you know, those two are my all-time favorite wrestlers.
That's awesome, man. What a way to get into it. Marty, welcome in. I'm doing well, buddy. I think my earliest wrestling memory is there's two matches that stick out as like the earliest matches that I can remember watching. It was the tag team match between the Steiners and the Outsiders, where Scott turned on Rick in WCW way back when. And then appropriately enough, on what happened on AEW this week, Chris Jericho versus Juventud Guerrera, title versus mask at Super Brawl 98 is one of my earliest favorite wrestling matches. Yeah, so we'll talk about that in a little bit, obviously, but suffice to say, based on where my earliest wrestling interest came from, I'm super stoked to see what happens on AEW next week. I'm definitely going to be fucking watching that. So you started watching wrestling by playing the game and then eased into it. So what brought you into the TikTok realm then? I know a lot of people, you might say the pandemic. That's what a lot of people tell me. But if I know right, and if I know my history a little bit, you actually started pre-pandemic, right?
Yeah, I started pre-pandemic. I want to say I started like committed to like making content on TikTok just in general in about August or September of 2019, because I had already been on there for a while, because like almost everybody out there that you ask or that I know, I missed Vine. I really missed Vine. Mm-hmm. And TikTok, when I found out that it could fill that void, because there was Vine-like content and just content that was like better than what Vine had to offer just because of the more options, you know, I got really hooked into that. And because I saw other people, you know, having opinions and talking about things with nuance behind them, I was like, I bet I could probably do this too. And, you know, maybe I'll gain an audience for it in the process. That wasn't the primary goal, but like, that was like in the back of my head. I was like, you know, everybody who makes content secretly hopes that that'll happen. But I just wanted to express my opinions and, you know, maybe get some perspectives on it that people didn't have. And, and I thought, you know, if other people can do it, then why can't I?
Right. When did you, is there a certain video or was there a certain time frame where maybe you woke up and checked your phone, or you saw how the comments were coming in, that you realized, okay, well, I've got something working here.
So I want to say I was sitting around 2,500 followers, and I see a video by somebody by the name of Chamber Pop where they made a video called "What Your Spotify Wrapped Artist Says About You." You know, they put the artist in the background and they just give like a quick like joke about, you know, who you are as a person based on who your most listened to artist was. So I did a spoof of that, credited him in my caption, and I called it "What Your Most Listened to Spotify Artist Says About You, Rock and Metal Edition," because rock and metal are the genres that I listen to the most. And I just put that video out there, not thinking anything of it, and within a week it had 100,000 views and 80,000 likes, and that was humbling. I couldn't fucking believe it. Like, I'm just some guy talking shit about people based on what they like the most, and I had, you know, comments tell me how much they loved it, how this is their favorite video ever, and I was in shock. I couldn't believe that I was capable of doing that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's interesting that, you know, because I started seeing your stuff that wasn't wrestling related pretty soon after I started using TikTok. But it's interesting because your first big video wasn't even wrestling related at all.
No, it wasn't.
So that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that Spotify series that I ended up doing like 13 parts of, like those first 2 to 3 videos alone are like what shot me up to like 10,000 followers. And then I think from that point on is when I dedicated my channel primarily to wrestling content, because that's what I enjoy talking about the most. Okay,
very cool. Yeah, wrestling content is primarily what I do. And for me, it was I delayed getting TikTok for a very long time.
As did I.
Because the only exposure I had to it was the ads on Facebook with the creepy people dressed as animals and doing the weird creepy dances. And I just had no interest in that. When the news broke in late 2020 that Trump was trying to shut down TikTok, late 2020, Trump was trying to shut down TikTok. I was like, you know what? I might as well check it out. I've heard there are good things on there. So I did. Ultimately, thankfully, TikTok did not get shut down. And then I started scrolling through and I saw you and I saw Axel and I saw Lou Nonsense. I think Heel Hugs was one of them I saw. And I was like, well, holy shit, you know, there's a wrestling community on TikTok. Who fucking knew? So I made a couple of videos that did okay. And then it was New Year's Day. I made episode 1 of Wrestling Opinions That Might Trigger You. I made it in the middle of the night at like 1 a.m. Just said, you know what? These are all things that I genuinely believe, but I think there are things that people might not agree with. So maybe I can create a little bit of discussion. I go to bed. I wake up at like noon because I slept in the next day. And I wake up and I've got like 300 notifications. And I'm like, what the fuck? What the fuck? And then I go, look.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden people are asking me about, hey, what's your opinion on this? And in the moment, that very first time I saw it, I was like, well, that's fucking humbling. Like all of a sudden people are asking me. So that's the moment that I was like, you know, I might actually have something here. Was when people started asking me for my opinions on things. So there's one other thing that we have in common, and I'm going to share my screen if I can. I don't know if I have the internet for this, but I'm going to give it a shot. And I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this. If you're not, that's fine. I think you'll be able to see it anyway. Let's see if it'll play. It's trying.
Will it just show up on my end when it's there?
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen. I thought it would show up. You see it? Okay.
I see it.
Yeah. I don't know if it's going to work. Like I'm trying to hit play and I don't think I have the right internet for it. But you can see it's our Family Guy duets. I love doing the Family Guy duets with you.
Uh-huh.
How long have you? So is it just a matter of? And don't break my heart here with the answer. Do you actually like and watch and enjoy Family Guy, or is it just a matter of, hey, the sounds are there and I'm going to use them?
I love Family Guy. It is one of my favorite shows. Definitely my favorite adult cartoon. I can quote that show like there's no fucking tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Every time you post one, I'm like, hey, I know that episode. Yeah. And I'm waiting for you to post one that I don't know, and it just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. One of the first things I started doing on TikTok was Dragon Ball Z abridged audios, which then led to like audios of other things that I like, you know, Hellsing abridged, Family Guy, other adult cartoons, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So Family Guy audios are just really fun to quote.
And people ask me all the time, like, people assume that I enjoy Family Guy because of the sometimes grotesque humor, or because of the offensive nature of some of the jokes. And I hate people who call it offensive, because Family Guy hates everybody. They make fun of white people, black people, Hispanic people, gay people, straight people, old people. They make fun of everybody. There's certain moments in the show where there's not anything remotely offensive about it, and it makes me almost shit myself with laughter. Perfect example. Perfect example. And I think maybe we need to do a TikTok duet with this one if we can find the sound. There's an episode where Stewie is sitting there watching Jolly Farm Review. And Brian comes and sits down, and he's like, "Oh, you watch a Jolly Farm Review? How do you watch that? That's stupid. How do you watch that, huh? Huh?" And so he's like, I can already tell that you've been drinking, and I just don't want to engage. So, and then the other time where he's watching Dolly Farm Review, or it's either that or it's Teletubbies, and Brian's talking shit to him, and Stewie just goes, "Commercial," and takes him in.
I'm gonna go get some graham crackers. Yeah,
it's those sudden just burst of humor moments that just it cracks me up.
Yeah, I love it. I love everything about that show.
All right. We have a question here before we move on. If I can get it. There we go. Ryan Spitzer says, do you both collect wrestling figures? From my end, no, I don't. I buy wrestling figures for my son. That's not to say that I think wrestling figures are only for children by any means. If I had the money and the space to store them, I would absolutely collect wrestling figures. Unfortunately, the part of my budget that allows me to buy wrestling figures go to my kid. He's got about 100 of them, from Braun Strowman to Bray Wyatt to The Rock to Roman Reigns to Bianca Belair. So I don't collect them, but I buy them for my son. What about you, Smith? What's your collection look like?
I used to. When I was that kid, I would just love to have, wrestling figures. So I used to do that, but I can't say I've done that in maybe 10 years. Yeah. So the most up-to-date ones I have mostly is, people from 10 years ago.
Yeah. I have a couple of collectibles that I recently found. My mom and dad have a barn up at their house, and they keep a lot of I have two brothers, and they keep a lot of our childhood shit in there. So I've got the 2011 year in photos. I got a couple of hard posters of Goldberg and the NWOs sitting around here somewhere. I've got a Zack Ryder foam fist that I got at a Raw from 2011. Yeah. Just here and there, bits and pieces, but no collection.
Chances are, if I was to ever get wrestling Funko Pops, or wrestling figures, they would be Funko Pops, because that's kind of the thing I collect now. If I'm looking at my wall over here, I got Kenny, Cody, the Bucks, the Fiend. Funny enough, Shawn Michaels, Sasha Banks, Braun Strowman.
Yep. So I wish I had a collection. Specifically, if I was able to afford to have a collection, it would probably be belts over figures. I would love to collect wrestling belts, but it's not something that I have. Yeah, like that.
Yeah, I got another one coming too. It should be shipped out in a few weeks.
Yeah, maybe one of these days. Mm-hmm. Look, it's a podcast. Says it's Smith. That's indeed.
That's my buddy Server Error.
Indeed, Smith.
That's Server Error 405.
Oh, okay.
/ Mr. Him from our promo battle league called NGTTWF.
Yeah. So it's funny, and I want to move on, but I just want to bring up this one thing because it's so funny that you bring up NGTTWF. E-fetting is actually something that I have a lot of experience with. I haven't done it on TikTok, but I did it fully for about 3 years, and then I did it on and off for another year on Facebook in a federation called BTW, Big Time Wrestling. I did video promos, and I was serious about it too. I put together my own entrance video. My promos were like 8 minutes long where I ran people down. Not to brag, but everyone in there was constantly telling me, "Oh, you're the best in here and you're really good." And it was a lot of fun. I hope that maybe one day I can find enough time to join in GTTWF. It's just right now not something that I have time for. But I keep an eye on the promos, and I love watching them. It gives me a lot of nostalgia feels. So
It'd be awesome if you did.
Yeah. I'm already in the Discord, so I have the door open. I just have to find time to actually start. All right, guys, 20 minutes in. Let's go ahead and talk about what you guys are all waiting for Smith and I to talk about. Bray Wyatt, also known as The Fiend, also known as Wyndham Rotunda, son of IRS, has been released by the WWE. There's a lot of unknowns regarding Bray Wyatt. There's a lot of unknowns regarding The Fiend. There's a lot of unknowns regarding the status of his release and what the reasoning was, so on and so forth. There are rumors. There is nothing confirmed by the company or by Bray himself. Rumors that I've heard, budget cuts. Rumors that I've heard are he was taking time off for his mental health. I've heard that he was having trouble dealing with the death of Brody Lee. I've heard that they tried to bring him back and he said he wasn't ready, and then they just ended up having to release him. And I've heard that Bray asked for his release. No matter what the reason is, I think the first reaction for me is just a mixture of sadness and anger. Just thinking about everything that he was capable of, everything that he did, everything that he still could do. And it's just sad. And I get angry that thinking about all the times that they dropped the ball with him. The Hell in a Cell finish, the title win in Saudi Arabia, the loss to Goldberg, the silly shit with Braun Strowman. Just thinking about all the times that WWE misfired or dropped the ball with Bray Wyatt, and even going all the way back to the Eater of Worlds, right? Losing to The Undertaker at WrestleMania, losing to John Cena at WrestleMania, holding the title for a month, and then immediately losing it to Randy Orton. Just all the times that they had lightning in a bottle with Bray, rather it was Eater of Worlds or The Fiend, and then they just let it go.
Not to mention being a transitional Universal Champion.
Yeah. So I think Smith, there's more that I could say, but I think it feeds well into what I think you're probably thinking about it. So what are your initial reactions?
My honest initial reaction to seeing Bray Wyatt getting released was apathy. It's not because I have anything against Bray Wyatt. I loved The Fiend. Like, as a concept, when they were first introducing him to us, I fell in love with the character. But because of just the sheer amount of releases and the amount of them that happen at one time and just the frequency in which they happen, I no longer have any feeling towards anybody getting released, regardless of who it is. Bray Wyatt just happens to be the next one, and like the rest of them, I just don't care anymore.
Yeah, my initial reaction, like I said, was shock, sadness, anger, but I think, it happened about 2 hours ago, right? And I think for the first 15 minutes, I made that TikTok video about it with my initial reaction, but I think as it set and it stewed and I was sitting here getting the podcast set up, I think I fell more into the zone that you're in now, where it's like, well, this is just how things go. Because even if Bray Wyatt asked for his release because he was struggling with the death of Brody Lee, that still tells me that there was something WWE could have done to try and help Bray Wyatt that they just did not do. And again, I'm hoping that Bray Wyatt comes out soon and talks about it, because I'd like to hear it from Bray's end. There's pieces of this that just aren't there. And I think that's the most frustrating part, is when we want to fully react to it and we don't have all the information.
I'm expecting a Chris Van Vliet interview within the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, that would be perfect. I want to just talk about the positives with Bray Wyatt and his career. Let's just assume he never comes back to WWE. I just want to just briefly go back and talk about some of the awesome moments that Bray Wyatt gave us. Um, that immediate debut where the Wyatt family just came out and beat the fuck out of Kane, of all people, that was one of the most effective debuts that I've seen in WWE in a very long time, because no one just comes up from NXT and beats the fuck out of Kane. But the Wyatt family did, and I think at that moment we knew there was something special. The Wyatt family versus the Shield, not even really the match, but that Raw 2 weeks before the match where they were facing each other on opposite sides of the ring and the crowd was going absolutely nuts. That moment sticks out in my mind. His first championship victory at Elimination Chamber, pinning AJ Styles. And then, of course, the first moment where we saw Funhouse Bray, and a lot of us were like, this is what we were waiting for? Like, this is trash. He's obviously going to be a jobber. And then 6 weeks later, the debut of the actual Fiend, and how we all felt. How we all felt when we saw that mask for the first time. So what leaps out at you?
I'd say the Firefly Funhouse stuff is what stuck out to me the most, just because I ended up loving the Fiend. Okay, putting all of the stuff aside that ended up happening with him, I loved the Fiend as a character and as a concept. And even before we saw the Fiend in his entirety, I was really digging the Firefly Funhouse segments, and at no point did I ever think that he was just going to be a jobber, and I was fully invested into where this was going.
Yeah. That moment of when he's doing all the freaky movements and the mask is on screen and you hear twinkle twinkle little star, like the first time I saw it, I had to pause my TV. I was like, what the fuck, this is the coolest thing WWE has ever done. So yeah, it just sucks. But again, to close on this, Wyndham Rotunda, if he wants to keep wrestling, he will find a place to keep wrestling. He's too respected, I think, too talented, too creative, too driven to let himself fail. You know, he saved his own career when he went to Vince and said, look, let me do this. Let me do this character and this story arc. If it fails, that's on me and you can release me. And he saved his own career when he went to the front. So I don't think anyone else could have done that. If he wants to land on his feet, and I think we all hope that he does, he will. And we'll see him rest. Now, again, is that going to be an AEW? Personally, I don't believe so. I don't
want that.
Yeah. I think I tend to agree with you. What's your thinking when people comment, you know, the 15,000 comments over the next 2 days that you're going to get that say, hey, how about Bray Wyatt to AEW? What are your thoughts on that?
I say that I don't want that, because if there's one thing that I can absolutely criticize AEW on, it's how it seems like they aren't caring that they're oversaturating their own market. Like, I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with ex-WWE talent coming to, AEW or to any other promotion, but there is such a thing as oversaturation. And, with already having rumors of Punk and Danielson, to add Bray Wyatt or Wyndham Rotunda on top of that, I just don't think it's a good move for them.
Yeah. Especially if he wants to keep doing something like The Fiend. I just think that you need the huge production value of WWE for The Fiend to really work.
Yeah.
And AEW has a big production value, but not, comparing Full Gear to WrestleMania, there's no fucking comparison.
Yeah,
right?
No. WWE's production value is unmatched and always will be unmatched. Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on. So here's the thing about Smith, if you don't know him very well, and if you don't pay attention to his hat. He loves himself a little bit of AEW. So here's the thing, Smith. I know that you keep track of the news and you watch highlights here and there, but for the most part, you don't watch weekly WWE, right?
No, I really don't, especially not during the pandemic era. I couldn't get used to the Thunderdome, no matter how hard I tried. The general consensus among my friends that were watching the main roster product was that Raw was in the shits. No surprise there. But that SmackDown was actually doing really well, and that Roman Reigns is doing probably his best career work. And I believe it. I believe that Roman Reigns is capable of doing his best career work and that he's capable of being a top guy and a great wrestler. It's just that it was happening on SmackDown in the Thunderdome. And, you lose me there. And the couple of times where I've attempted to get back into the product by like watching a Raw or watching a SmackDown, I just can't stay interested. I don't know if it's because I'm just that jaded or I'm just burnt out, but I just can't seem to bring myself to invest long term.
What about NXT? Do you have any interest in NXT?
I do my best to keep up with NXT. I don't watch every single week, but I do watch most weeks. But ever since it got moved onto television to, compete with AEW, because that's initially why it was brought up in the first place. It's why they brought it up after AEW announced its time slot and put it on the exact same one, just on a different network. I feel like it's suffering some of the same fate that the main roster is kind of suffering in terms of like booking decisions that like typically it really wasn't being plagued with because NXT just really wasn't booked that way. But now I feel like it's turning into that more and more, and it's making me slightly jaded of NXT now, which scares me because I loved NXT, and to a certain degree, I still love NXT and what it is capable of.
Yeah. I would agree that there's something different about NXT. It still has all the same guys, right? It still has Adam Cole and Gargano and Ciampa and Walter and all these guys, and then new acts like MSK and Grizzled Young Veterans, and that are all still capable of putting on money matches week over week. But you can just tell there's a little bit of Vince in NXT now, and you can just tell that Vince does not watch NXT. And you don't have to hear it from him that he doesn't watch NXT. You can see in how Karrion Kross, and we'll talk about Karrion Kross in just a little bit, you can see in how Karrion Kross is booked without Scarlett, without all the trimmings that make Karrion Kross, just coming out like a normal guy, that Vince hasn't watched an episode of NXT in years, and I think that's the biggest problem with it. So let's focus back on AEW now, because I don't want to talk forever about what you hate. Let's talk about what you like. So what was it about AEW that drew you in and kept you from giving up on wrestling completely? Was it the performers, or was it something else about the product? What was it that drew you in?
I think it was just the concept of a breath of fresh air and a new, like, genuine alternative after, Impact / TNA started becoming like less and less of like a suitable alternative. And because I was so jaded by the WWE product and its cyclical nature and just the booking practices that I'm just so fucking sick of. And with AEW promising that it was not going to do that, and with some exceptions, I do believe they have lived up to their word in that regard. It's just a product that I feel I can genuinely invest in, whereas I can't say I feel that same way with WWE's main roster.
Okay. I think AEW is great overall. I think that their weekly shows are much more consistently entertaining than anything WWE puts out, with the exception of SmackDown. I personally believe, having watched both products every week for the past several months, that from week to week, which show was better, SmackDown or AEW? To me, it's a toss-up, and it really just depends on what you like, because what's going on in the ring is going to be different on both shows. But to me, I think SmackDown and AEW kind of balance each other out, and I think those two are the real competition. Forget what's going on with Raw and forget what's going on with NXT now, because NXT has given up on its battle with AEW. I think that the real battle on deciding what's going on is between AEW and SmackDown. So we can talk for days about what's good about AEW. I want to talk about the things that I find problematic with AEW, and we'll just list a few one at a time, and you can give me your reaction to it.
Okay.
Number one of my biggest problems with AEW. Here's the thing. I have a 5-year-old son that starts school soon. I work 40 to 50 hours a week, depending on how much I've needed. All of that being said, and with everything else that I do in my life, I just have not had time, even pre-pandemic, to get out and go watch independent wrestling or to research independent wrestling or to learn about all these guys. And I've had several situations where someone has come out on the stage in AEW and Excalibur has said, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, it's that person, and I have no idea who it is. Now, eventually I learn, but it feels like AEW expects me to just know who these people are. To be perfectly honest, like Nick Gage, right? I don't watch a lot of men. I had heard the name. I didn't know he was a deathmatch wrestler. I just knew he was a wrestler. So what is your reaction to me? And I've heard other people say, I don't like how AEW expects me to just know who these people are when they come in.
I think it's a legitimate criticism. I honestly do. I think they rely too much on, the diehards and, like, to a degree, your diehard independent wrestler, wrestling fans that, know way more about these people than your average casual viewer is. And I think that it can sort of alienate the casual viewer. But at the same time, as you mentioned, with somebody like Excalibur just being the guy that knows absolutely everything about everybody, I can see why that would make you feel out of the loop, and in a way can almost feel like gatekeeping, sort of, in a sense. But to that, I would ask the question, what would you prefer? Somebody like Excalibur knowing everything about somebody so that they can hopefully fill you in about this person that you know nothing about, or for somebody to debut and have the commentators know absolutely nothing and be in the same boat as you where everybody's confused?
I think one of the things that WWE does right that AEW struggles with is promo packages. I think there's something to be said for a nice, good old-fashioned promo package. AEW, it's a double-edged sword with, like, the Nick Gage situation, because they want it to be a surprise. They want that pop when MJF says he robbed a bank. But for me, I'm like, okay, so he's bringing in a bank robber, like. So I guess it just depends, because my opinion is the diehards are always going to be there, right? I don't think they're going anywhere, because I think people like you went and attached themselves to AEW because of their maybe previous conception of what was wrong with WWE. And then when you got there, everything was great, so you stuck with it, right? I think people like you are not going anywhere, but I think where AEW is going to struggle is bringing people in who don't have that previous notion about WWE. And I could see people getting confused by AEW because of how spastic a lot of the things occur, and because there's a lot of people that come in and a lot of match types that get thrown at us, and there's no explanation of it whatsoever, and then we're just expected to know who they are. So yeah, I just think maybe like some kind of promo video for these people when they show up would be nice. Maybe that.
Yeah, I think a good example that they have done of that is with Jade Cargill. Despite them not really using her that much at the moment, I think they did present her really well. And yeah, I do think that is something that they could work on, with another example of that being Eddie Kingston. Eddie Kingston is great, but people had absolutely no idea who he was. He just showed up one day talking shit on Cody because he happens to be the next guy for the Open Challenge. And, I had like a brief knowledge of who he was because I had seen him like a couple of times on NWA Power when that existed. Yeah. But aside from that, generally I am in the same boat as people as well. I'm not like a die-hard indie guy that knows everything about all these guys that are coming in. I was familiar with some of these names thanks to my, at the time, brief exposure to Ring of Honor and New Japan and, watching All In, where a lot of this kind of transpired from. But yeah, at the same time, like, I'm usually in that same boat. The reason why I tend to be less critical and about things like that is because with AEW, and I know not everybody feels this way, but generally I can give AEW the benefit of the doubt that even if I know absolutely nothing about this talent, they have a way of making me care about them. There will be something that they can craft in the AEW, universe or realm, whatever you want to call it, that can make this character unique to that company in case, which will be the case where people don't know about them from what they did before.
Yeah. And I will say, just to close on this, I think that AEW needs to strike a balance, because I think WWE does great at building up the debut of someone, but then typically once they come in, they fall flat. AEW is the exact opposite. They do nothing to build somebody up that's debuting. They just walk out on the stage and start talking. But then through their booking, people like Eddie Kingston, people like John Silver from the Dark Order, people like Jungle Boy, through their booking and through their character work, they eventually get themselves over, including with me. So I just wish there was a balance. I wish we could have that strong build to know who they are, but then that consistent booking that makes them even better. So anyway, we'll move on. You mentioned Cody Rhodes. Cody Rhodes is a very enigmatic figure. He's a very controversial figure on the online wrestling community. I think there are times where Cody Rhodes is great. I think there are times where Cody Rhodes is not so great. And I don't know if he's the one making his own booking decisions or if it's Tony Khan getting in his ear and making those booking decisions. There are just things that happen with Cody Rhodes on AEW television that bother me. Like with his match with Anthony Ogogo. That did not need to be the American Dream versus that did not need to be the Revolutionary War inside of a wrestling ring. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like we took everything that had been building up with the factory and with the Nightmare Family, everything with QT Marshall, and all of a sudden, none of that fucking mattered because Cody Rhodes wanted to cosplay as his daddy, God rest his soul. And so what is going on? And is it just my perception? Do you see it too? Is there an explanation for it that I'm missing? It just feels like Cody books himself in these situations that outshines the story that he's in. Malachi Black and his return. So what's your opinion on Cody Rhodes and his booking?
I absolutely see the criticisms and the flaws because as much as I love Cody as a wrestler, I'm not, completely blind to the stuff that he puts himself into that he doesn't need to be in, and like the way he structures angles in ways that they don't need to be structured. Like, believe me, as much as a lot of people didn't, but I liked the match between Cody Rhodes and Anthony Ogogo. Did I like the build? Did I like how they had to make it patriotic as fuck just because it happens to be Memorial Day weekend? No, I was not a fan of that. But the rule of thumb that I always give when it comes to Cody Rhodes, and I've said this several times on TikTok, it's okay to not like him, just don't be stupid about it. There are valid things that you can criticize Cody Rhodes on, whether it be stuff like the Go-Go feud, feeling the need to have a gender reveal in the middle of Dynamite when that could be used to like have a interview or a segment to build up a talent that needs it way more than he does, or the Shaq match, which I absolutely hated and I did not go into with an open mind. And in hindsight is worth not going into with an open mind because of how awful it was. Those are things you can criticize Cody on. But at the end of the day, I still view him as a valuable talent and as a valuable wrestler, whether he's the one going over or he's putting someone else over. So it's okay to not like him. Just don't be stupid about it.
Yeah. So Marty says Cody going down the road of Triple H burying talent. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think Cody in his booking makes other people look dumb, like Jade Cargill, for instance.
Yeah.
If she's strong enough to beat up Cody on her own, what she seemed to think she had the confidence to do, why does she need to bring in Shaq? Anthony Ogogo, why was he willing to go along with Cody's need to cosplay as his daddy when he had other reasons to want to fight Cody Rhodes? And I think people it's because of the booking that people get that misconception of him, because every time a new guy debuts, they want to go after Cody, which makes Cody feel like the top dog. Listen, Cody left WWE, went to places like Japan and Ring of Honor, and he got himself over. Like, that's not a canned pop when Cody Rhodes' music hits on AEW. People are genuinely excited to see him. So I'm not saying take Cody off TV or Cody is burying the younger talent. I'm just saying I think Cody needs to have more of a clearer idea of what things look like, not just in his own head, but how it's going to translate to the television. And I would hope that when he goes back and watches it after the fact, he realizes, okay, yeah, that was pretty fucking dumb, but it keeps happening. So he's obviously not. So one of the other things, speaking of that a lot, not necessarily me in this case, but I could see the merits to the argument, is that the Elite take up too much TV time. Is that there's too much time on Dynamite dedicated to what's going on with the Elite and what's going on with Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks and all those guys. So what is your analysis, I guess, of how AEW spends its television time putting over the Elite?
Well, when it comes to the narrative of the Elite spend too much time on AEW, at this point, I tend to just disagree with that on principle, because typically that argument is coming from people that don't actually know what they want. Because if you look back at year one of AEW, which is not perfect in any capacity for, a myriad of reasons, the Elite, except for like Cody Rhodes, spent a majority of their time like putting other people over. Kenny Omega put over Pac at the first All Out. The Young Bucks put over Private Party of the first round of a tag team tournament, and they put over Santana and Ortiz at Full Gear. Cody Rhodes booked himself, or was booked in a way that he can never become the world champion of a company that he is a vice president of. So they spend this time in the beginning showing people that they're not just looking to book themselves to the top, and then eventually there comes the time where they do book themselves to the top. The Young Bucks are the tag champs. Kenny Omega's the world champ. Cody Rhodes got to be the inaugural TNT champion. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the people running a company booking themselves to have a proper amount of time with that company. If you want to get into arguments about the nuances of the booking, that's completely fair game. But when you consider these factors, I don't think there's really that much merit to the argument that all they do is book themselves and no one gets any other time, when that argument comes from people who feel like they just want to push a narrative.
What about and I get that the Elite's kind of gimmick as a group is that they are a little bit fourth wall breaking, which works in a lot of capacities. But where I draw the line and where I get annoyed with the Elite and where I get this shit off the TV, I'm done watching it, is when we start bringing in these petty sort of references and insults towards WWE. Telling Chris Jericho, hey, if you weren't here, you'd be pulling the curtain at the Performance Center, and the Young Bucks doing impressions of CM Punk and doing impressions of things that happened on WWE last week. Do you think, and again, it happens all the time on Being the Elite. Like, if you watch Being the Elite, they do it all the fucking time. Mm-hmm. Do you think those references and those insults are maybe petty in any way? Do you think they're fair, foul? What do you make of their constant references to WWE?
Oh, they're definitely petty. They're definitely doing it for the sake of being petty. And I don't agree with a lot of the, things that they do all the time with, all the references that they make. I can do without most of them. Do I understand why they're doing it? To a degree, yes, but I can agree that it does get to be a bit much. Now, BTE jabs, I can sort of let slide, because with like one exception that I can think of, stuff that happens on BTE tends to not really matter in the grand scheme of Dynamite. Yeah. Occasionally there will be a thing, I like I said, I thought of one example. But generally I tend to think of BTE as its like own. So when I look at jabs that I think, have some kind of significance to them, it's the ones that happen like on Dynamite, and if they were to happen on Rampage when it comes up, on Rampage as well, if that's what they so choose to do. So I do think there's merits to the argument that they need to fucking cool it with the jabs and the petty insults.
Yeah. It was okay at first, and then it got a little bit too kind of often for me. So
yeah,
I did a video or a TikTok a couple of months ago where I talked about JR. Kind of went micro viral because I started the video with JR's got to go, and I gave the reasons. So, JR, obviously he makes a lot of mistakes. He stumbles over his words. He very often can't keep up with Tony and Excalibur on the desk. He gets confused very easily, and sometimes he's even just hard to understand. And again, that's not his fault. He's an older gentleman with Bell's palsy. So what's your opinion with JR's current position with AEW? Is he doing just enough? Is he doing too much? Or is he, what do you think?
I think generally, for the most part, he's doing just fine in the position that he is. He's not perfect. He's certainly not what he used to be, but I do still view him as a valuable asset to that company, even if there are instances where he calls the show WWE Dynamite or he calls Kenny Omega the WWE champion. But if he holds himself accountable when he does things like that. He took the Twitter after he found out that he called it WWE Dynamite and completely admitted that was completely unprofessional on my part. I'm going to do my best to, never let this happen again, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop. And I respect that. As a veteran in the commentary, when it comes to commentary in the wrestling industry, I think he still has stuff to offer. Now, naturally, he's not going to be as familiar with AEW's talent because when he was doing commentary with the WWE, he also happens to be very much involved with the talent, where he'd work one-on-one with them, or I forget exactly what he would do, but he knew those people. He doesn't have
talent relations.
Yeah, he was in talent relations. He doesn't have that same, type of relationship with AEW's talent, which is not an excuse as to why he tends to not be able to keep up, but it's just like an explanation as to why that is. Do I think that that's inherently a bad thing? Not necessarily. Do I think there's areas in which he could improve? Sure. Do I think that he needs to go and he adds nothing of value anymore to AEW or to wrestling? No, I think JR will always be JR, regardless of what kind of slip-ups he has or what the public perception is of him.
Yeah, so here's the thing about JR. First of all, a lot of people got pissed at me in my comments because they thought that me saying JR has to go meant that I was calling for JR to just be fired. And that's just not the case. I've never called for anyone's job. JR could work for AEW. When he does the interviews, like when he did the sit-down interview with Andrade, and I fully enjoy. I think JR still has a great sort of presence for those one-on-one interviews as the veteran. But JR, two of his best friends in WWE were The Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin. And Stone Cold recognized when it was time to walk away. And so he did. He didn't want to become a parody of himself. Undertaker did not realize when it was too late to walk away. And for a while there, he kind of saved himself in the last couple of years. But for a while there, with Saudi Arabia, with Goldberg, and with Bray Wyatt, he became a parody of himself. And I think right now Jim Ross is becoming a parody of himself. Because it's not just the big noticeable moments where he calls the company by the wrong name, or he calls the championship by the wrong name, or the wrestler by the wrong name. He just has moments where he just trails off in the middle of commentary and says, oh, now they deliver and then Excalibur has to jump in and save him, and he's like, oh, lost my train of thought there for a second. And it happens way too often in my estimation. I think he's doing more harm than good at the commentator booth.
I can see that. Yeah, and to be honest, if I had a nickel for every time I heard him, especially throughout the pandemic, say we'll be right back in picture-in-picture, and the picture-in-picture doesn't happen for like another 10 to 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I do think there's merit to the argument.
So again, I'm not calling for JR's job. Yeah.
Good.
I think he could easily get back to work in a talent relations role with AEW. He could continue to be a backstage interviewer role. I just think that I think the booth is one man too heavy. Jay Summers has recommended getting maybe a female commentator in there and maybe showing AEW showing WWE, hey, you guys couldn't make this work, but we can. And Jay Summers recommended someone specific. Again, Jay Summers is way more knowledgeable with the indies than you and I are. I can't remember the person's name, but I think that might be. What do you think about AEW getting a female commentator in there, maybe to try and show that they can do something that WWE couldn't make work? Because Renee Young, for as talented and as charismatic as she was awful on the commentator booth, and it was 100% to do with what she was being asked to do. So what do you think of that idea?
I think that it's perfectly feasible because they've literally already done that. Granted, I know a lot of people probably haven't seen this, but when they did their women's tag team tournament on YouTube, they brought in a female commentator. I can't, remember her name for the life of me, but I believe she did also have some experience in wrestling, but she was on the commentary booth to call those matches in that tournament, and in my opinion, she did a good job. So I think if they were to introduce a female, it should be her because they seem to already have a working relationship with her. And I think she would be a good fit for that booth, whether she's like a third person to replace somebody or if it's just her and some second person.
Yeah. Well, there's one more topic I wanted to talk to you about today, and it's kind of getting away from AEW, but it is something, it's my most recent video that sort of went micro viral. Talking about John Cena and Kurt Angle and sort of maybe referencing what happened with Karrion Kross on Raw recently. Mm-hmm. I brought up the fact that John Cena lost to Kurt Angle in his debut match. And John Cena, obviously, John Cena never recovered, obviously being sarcastic. Got attacked in the comments a little bit, a comment that I saw a lot. That's not the same thing. Which I totally get, but my point was you can't look at someone who loses once and just immediately call their career squashed or call their run squashed. So I know you saw the video because you commented on it. So what was your reaction to seeing that?
I didn't watch that episode of Raw. I just saw the clip,
right.
From other people reacting to it and talking about it. And then eventually I looked it up on my own, which didn't take that long because the match was 1 minute and 39 seconds. And, when people say that it's not the same thing, they're absolutely right in that assessment because, it's not, I'm not pissed at the fact that, the reasons why I'm pissed at Karrion Kross losing in 1 minute and 39 seconds to Jeff Hardy have nothing to do with me thinking that he's just going to be immediately buried, but it does have everything to do with just a general pattern that we've noticed with NXT call-ups, where at some point or another, something goes wrong, and especially if it's a first impression of somebody, if you give somebody a wrong first impression of someone, then that sticks with people forever because first impressions mean everything, whether people want to admit it or not. So when you put Karrion Kross, the NXT champion, and you give him that belt on your main roster, but you strip away everything else about his presentation and you have him lose by a roll-up in under 2 minutes, objectively, you've hurt the presentation, whether it was Karrion Kross or anybody else that had yet to be on the main roster. That is a shit way, objectively, of portraying somebody who's supposed to be a dominant talent.
So people tell me that when people tell me, oh, hey, Karrion Kross was the NXT champion, John Cena wasn't an undefeated NXT champion, I can almost guarantee that if NXT had been a thing or if OVW had been as successful as NXT ended up being, John Cena probably would have been an undefeated OVW champion. I don't think there's any way for us to know, right? And you mentioned earlier with the WWE releases about how you're sort of apathetic to it, right? I am now completely apathetic to the fact that when an NXT guy comes up, they're not going to canonically continue what they were doing on NXT.
I feel the same way.
It's not going to happen. Keith Lee didn't come up, and he was not booked as if he was just a double champion on NXT, even though he was. There's a reason that you hear these reports that Adam Cole and Gargano and Ciampa do not want to go to Raw or SmackDown. They would very much like to stay on NXT because they want to be able to canonically continue. Roman Reigns told Finn Balor on SmackDown this past Friday they were doing a contract signing for a match that ended up not happening, which I called, by the way. And Roman Reigns told Finn, hey, if you sign this contract, I'm going to beat your ass so bad that you'll end up back in NXT. And that's how the main roster look. You can take that one line from Roman Reigns' promo, copy it, put it on a banner, and hang it on the wall. I'll send your ass back to NXT. That's how Vince views NXT. They're the developmental brand, and you should take it as a demotion for having gone back there. So he's not going to keep the same story from someone in NXT coming to the main roster. He's going to start them completely over. And there's just nothing that we can do about that. So people getting mad that Karrion Kross lost to Jeff Hardy are letting it get in their feels that he did all of this in NXT. Guess what? I'm here to break the news to you because that's what I do. Infamous is in my name. That doesn't fucking matter. Doesn't matter what he did on NXT. It doesn't matter that he's the NXT champion. That belt might as well be a prop. He might as well be bringing out a jar of Kool-Aid. Vince doesn't care. So maybe they had a story to it. Maybe he didn't. But the reason that I was so sarcastic in my video and making fun of people who were so upset about it is because I've gotten apathetic and I've gotten to where I expect these NXT guys to come up and look completely different than they did on NXT. So your response to that and my reasoning for the video is what?
My initial response to anybody who brings up either the John Cena Kurt Angle thing or the Charlotte Flair getting rolled up by Natalya thing is it's predictable, but it's to say that it's not the same thing. And I say that it's not the same thing because that's my thing. I think those are bad faith arguments, and I do not like bad faith arguments. The reason that John Cena losing to Kurt Angle in his debut is not the same thing as Jeff Hardy beating Karrion Kross in Kross's main roster debut is that Kurt Angle, correct me if I'm wrong, but Kurt Angle was the world champion at the time, correct?
I believe that he was, and he was doing an open challenge.
He was a dominant world champion on a main roster brand, issuing an open challenge to somebody, and it was a test to see if John Cena was capable of being maybe not the company man, but capable of holding his own on that main roster. Whereas, and it was against Kurt Angle, somebody who, is already established as a dominant guy, so we wouldn't be shocked if he were to happen to have beaten John Cena clean or in any manner. Whereas the thing with Karrion Kross is that in Jeff Hardy is that what was Jeff Hardy doing? Jeff Hardy spent most of 2020 being injured, came back, had an Intercontinental Championship run that nobody talked about, got drafted to Raw, and then spent that time jobbing out to the likes of Lars Sullivan, Jinder Mahal, other people whose names are escaping me. So in our minds, despite the fact that, there is still a very loyal Jeff Hardy fan base, Jeff Hardy is being portrayed as a joke. Whereas anybody who watches NXT and sees the way that Karrion Kross is being portrayed just immediately had their intelligence insulted by seeing an undefeated dominant champion lose to somebody who spent the last 6 months being treated like a jobber in under 2 minutes.
I think it's funny, speaking of the loyal Jeff Hardy fan base, because I did a video months ago talking about how Jeff Hardy wasn't that guy anymore and how he was done and how he needs to retire, which I still believe based on how he moves in the ring. And it was a lot of those same people commenting on my video and saying Karrion Kross should have been buried and this is trash. And I just want to make another video, but I'm not because I just got a posting ban and I don't want to piss anybody else off. I'm trying to lay low for now.
Do we have the same account? Because that's the exact same thing that happened to me. The Jeff Hardy fan base got so mad at me for my criticisms of Jeff Hardy that I, too, got posting banned for a day to the point where I said, fuck it. These people, these dick riders, they're too much for me. It seems like I can't criticize Jeff Hardy in any capacity without, the maximum amount of people being pissed. So this is a battle I can't win. I'm letting the Jeff Hardy topic go.
Yeah. Yeah. Those same people were the ones saying, Jeff Hardy needs a push, and then the second that he beats Karrion Kross, they're like, no, not like this.
Yeah. I never was of the opinion that Jeff Hardy was deserving of a push in 2020 or 2021.
Yeah. Me neither. Him and his brother, Matt Hardy, thank goodness. I've always loved Jeff more than Matt, but the one thing that Matt is doing right that Jeff is not doing is Matt is limiting his in-ring abilities now. He's more of a manager role because when he walks, it looks like his hip is broken. And Jeff Hardy is very much the same way. I think Jeff needs to go more down the road of Matt.
Yeah. Matt Hardy is more likely in an AEW ring putting somebody else over than Jeff is of being booked to put other people over. I think Matt Hardy, despite being way less over. See, that's the thing. I never argued that Jeff Hardy was not the more popular guy. I never argued that Jeff Hardy was like, not super over, because he was. We know these things. If you try to argue that, then you're being delusional. But I view Matt Hardy as being the better worker, since he couldn't rely on flips and other high spots. I view him as being the more versatile guy and the better talker, because those are things that I think he can do way better than Jeff can. And so for those reasons, I am more invested in what Matt is doing in 2021 and seeing what he's capable of bringing to the table than what Jeff is capable of bringing to the table in 2021.
Yep. I would agree. So with that, Smith, we're a little bit over the hour mark. I know that you got to get along with your day, but I would like you to go ahead and plug yourself in just a moment. Got a couple of things I want to plug real quick. If you are interested in merch for myself or for Fired Up Sports Network, we do have that available as well. One of the designs that I'm pretty excited for that we just came up with is this one. It just says blocked across the T-shirt. And then we have a couple other designs as well. I'm going to turn this banner off so you can read the bottom there. FiredUpSportsApparel.com. If you want some Wrestling with My Thoughts merch or some Infamous Opinionist merch, go ahead and head over there and check it out. So with that being said, Smith, where can everybody find you for more of your content, sir?
The name that you see right here, Smithception, that is my name on every single social media platform that I'm on, spelled lowercase. There's never any fancy thing, way that it's spelled or way that it's, typed out. I'm Smithception and everything you can find, primarily on TikTok, but I also have some YouTube content, and maybe I'll dabble more into YouTube content in the future, but primarily I'm on TikTok. So that's where you can find me mostly.
Okay, Smith, hey, man, I appreciate you being on with us today, dude. It's been a blast. I'll have you on again in the future. Thank you, everybody who watched. Thank you, everybody who joined in and asked your questions. I'll be here next Saturday. I'm also planning maybe a special episode next week with a couple of other guests. I'm trying to run down my bucket list and get everybody on TikTok as a guest. So we might have Mitri to God on pretty soon. Narcolepsy Boy might be on pretty soon. I'm already talking with him. So keep an eye out for those. Smith, keep up with your content, man. I really love it, and I really appreciate it. So keep it up, man. Thanks for coming on.
For sure, man. Thanks again for having me.